I clearly audible?
Yeah.
Peer preference is the same, just raise your hand. Do not tap or like do anything, please don't like this. Taking my speech in 3, 2, 1. We believe that when a state like United States becomes a Venezuelan president and kills the Iranian dictator, causing mass instability, chaos, and violating state sovereignty, it is generally a bad thing. 3 things in setup then. Number 1, what this hierarchy usually what it look like and why they important for this debate. Second, what this targeting like looks like in terms of statecraft and why is it regrettable. And thirdly, what the implication this has for the historically created and what is the counterfactual. Before I move on, a simple clarification. This debate isn't about accountability of opposition, as call-out can still exist in terms of actions done by second leaders. Anyway, which means call-outs in terms of policies, economic sanctions, and embargoes are still symmetric via state opportunity so long as it does not target a particular individual to begin with. They have the burden to prove why this particular targeting is the most important factor for them to get any level of accountability in their opponent. But also, this debate is on foreign land and external relations, not internal political call-outs, which can still exist in a particular right of the world. The binary of this debate is simple. If they go ahead and say that there is an incentive, there is a good incentive for the state to go ahead and do so, I'm going to prove why there are better mechanisms for them to do so. And if there is a perverse incentive for the state to go ahead and do so, I'm going to prove why there is different exist and why there is problematic historical on their side of the world. What these leaders even go ahead and look like? These probably look like number 1 military generals, which probably means army leaders, strategists, etc. But secondly, political leaders like probably president, PMs, cabinet ministers, etc. Why are they important and crucial in functioning of state machinery? Because these people are the fundamental pillars of leadership in statecraft at all points of time. A prime minister is not just a politician, but a leader of a particular nation that represents the nation, the sovereignty and the identity of the state in an international space and national space to begin with. They go ahead and make policy, they go ahead and like probably try, they are the elected representative of the people and the representative of a nation at all points of time. They go ahead and like pass policies and like create some sort of discord. But secondly, the military general also serves as strategist, which go ahead and protect nations and leading the military person at all points of time. They go ahead and decide when to go ahead and attack, where to go ahead and really protect, at which point of time the people go ahead and protect at all points of time. This is important in terms of perception and working of state machinery to begin with. As number 1, you probably need immunity and safety for said people to have the level of state stability. The reason is simple because of the fact that this PM and all of these leaders probably need the ability to go ahead and function well. They do not need the privacy and all of these scenarios being violated. They probably need the ability to go ahead and function at all points of time in a greater capacity. But secondly, you probably need military in general to go ahead and function to protect civilian and the nation at all points of time. You need them to function well and in the credit security. How does this targeting then go ahead and happen then? 2 forms of targeting happen. Number 1 is military targeting, where the nation like United States go ahead and kidnap presidents, kill off military leaders, etc. But secondly is political targeting, which I will come to in a bit. What does this military targeting likely go ahead and do? It probably looks like United States going ahead and kidnapping the Venezuelan president. What did they and like installing another president in its place, which created a Why is it problematic to begin with? Simply on 2 levels. Number 1, on the fact that 1, this directly violates the principle of democracy and historically has done so based on the puppet governments that the United States had established in the Middle East and all of these other nations to begin with. This has created systemic levels of state violence because of the fact that these leaders are not elected representatives. They already have different minority groups who do not even get represented in the Middle East at all points of time. This directly violates not just the principle of democracy but also the lives of people because it creates structural levels of like instability in these sort of nations based on the fact that these like leaders do not even represent the interests of the people, only represent the interests of these foreign actors to begin with. This is literally in the violation of any form of democratic government that has historically existed to begin with. This harm is probably also perpetuated through history when you go ahead and say that how probably Julius Caesar was like stabbed by Brutus at all points of time on the basis of them being killed off, and I think this is a generally bad thing, including to begin with. But when political targeting happens on three levels, which violates 3 principles already frame out, which is the principle of state sovereignty, principle of privacy, and principle of democracy at all points of time. These 3 things get violated how? Because you probably use information to go ahead and politically target people, which probably looks like how Russia went forward and tried to like Russia probably leaked some sort of private details about some like different actors in the Crimean war or something, or in the Ukraine war to go ahead and destabilize the Ukrainian government at all points of time. They probably leak private information of different hierarchy individuals and actors, which go ahead and violate the principle, the base principle on what political science stands on. Because what is politics? Politics is the ability for you to elect people, come together and create policies at all points of time. If you directly target and what we know as ad hominem, which is the fact that you directly target the person's legitimacy instead of the policy that they're likely going ahead and creating. The reason they probably creates far greater levels of instability for the person to ever go and function in a good capacity at all points of time. To have to defend their own sovereignty before you can defend the state. At all points of time, this creates this sort of information political targeting. But secondly, there is falsification and defamation which happens in this sort of world. Where number one, you probably also have this misconstrued videos and videography misrepresentation of AI and deepfakes being created by a group which go ahead and try to delegitimize certain political actors at all points of time. There is a greater level of misinformation which they go ahead and raise or information about to begin with. On political puppeteering, then you probably go ahead and also go ahead and implement puppet governments in the Middle East as I've already got it figured out based on your incentives that you want from the state at all points of time. You also probably fund the state destabilization mechanisms. You probably led to the creation of the ISIS in the Middle East at all points of time based on the fact that you probably went into like destabilize the Iran government to the extent that the ISIS was created. It created so many numbers of lives at all points of time. You probably infiltrate cabinets and extort them at all points of time. What is a counterfactual there? A counterfactual is threefold. Number one, a military policy. This sort of intervention never existed on our world. What does it take to me? That we are likely going to, for our collars to exist on our world, that we have been collaborating with human rights organizations and watches we still exist symmetrical on our world for the information to go ahead and call out nations, or the trade embargoes that we go ahead and put at all points of time. Which means when China went forward and harmed the Rohingya Muslims, we would still go ahead and have trade embargoes on China because it was a UN human rights policy which we went forward and analyzed to begin with. I think they still have some level of accountability on our side of the world. But secondly, in political policies, we go ahead and tell you that this explicit targeting is very uncharitable and not pure.
Embargoes and all different policies still exist in our side of the paradigm. Explain why are they not working?
I already got to tell you that all of the harms that I talk about with this particular targeting of these external leaders is so problematic to begin with. If you do not listen to me, in case I will give it. More importantly, on political policies, their explicit targeting is something which is uncharitable on all of the principles that I talk about in state sovereignty and the principle of privacy and principle of democracy at all points of time. You can tell you that we do not have this sort of explicit targeting of individuals, but the policies and the human rights problems that they going to create at all points of time will target the Israeli state and not the Netanyahu as an actor at all points of time. That is why we go ahead and tell you that we still have like this directly on our world, this is a direct violation of foreign policy for you to go ahead and try to infiltrate other states or establish puppet governments at all points of time. It does not go ahead and happen on our world because we have still yet to go ahead and have this counterfactual that this does not exist on our world. We're likely that means on three levels. Number one, on the historical harms and the amount of lives lost due to the creation of the ISIS, all of these things never go ahead and happen on our world firstly. But secondly, on the political legitimacy, I do not likely go ahead and think that this sort of like wars and etc. and all of this destabilization of puppet governments
for the fine speech, call upon the elder on the stage.
Is it still going on?
Hey, can anyone check from the phone your audio or probably for audio check?
Wow!
I want people to listen to me. Don't do that.
Amazing. Where is the link?
That is not true. That is not true.
I randomly click.
No, that is not true.
Wait, what not there? No, that is not there.
Hello. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Unfortunately.
थोड़ा डिले है बट आ जाए कंटिन्यू
See yourself.
Okay. Piyush going as the leader of opposition. No preferred pronouns for POIs, snap, or just call out POI. I probably won't be listening to you guys. So see you guys outside. Okay, starting my speech then. On the background of 3, 2, 1. Kindly note that we can propagate all points and then go ahead and approve all the benefits that the government already provides, because environment policies already continue to exist. What is the burden of the debate then for these kind of propositions? We probably only have to prove that, okay, targeting these political leaders or these military leaders is number one, an efficient tool, but number two, a legitimate tool. And as long as we go ahead and prove that, we anyway take this debate by a clear margin, because those benefits continue to exist on our side of the world. What Naman does is extremely smart. He probably goes ahead and tells you 3 to 4 extremely cherry-picked examples that, okay, when this targeting has happened, these sort of harms have been caused, and probably, due to all of these harms, targeting in general is bad. But understand on 2 levels. And number one, if probably assassination of Mussolini was bad, Italy should never have become a democracy. Principle of democracy probably on that very scale actually got better on that idea. But probably on the idea of, let's say, state sovereignty. State sovereignty is something which already has an international binding that currently exists. Beyond that, on the international binding, if probably US goes ahead and intervenes in states like Iran and Venezuela, that is something that does not exist, that we probably do not go ahead and even classify as a legitimate targeting. What is legitimate targeting then? On that very idea, understand that who is doing this targeting on the first scale? Military targeting, as Naman has pretty well explained, that probably you can go ahead and arrest or detain a political or a military leader, or probably assassination of some kind. But secondarily and more importantly, narrative-based targeting, media targeting. These exist on 2 folds then. That number one, media movements exist, that social movements that can be covered by the media, or probably the media probably sets a narrative which continues to exist in that very fold, that, okay, probably this leader is doing something extremely undemocratic. This leader is probably doing something which probably does not serve humanity in a sense. The media narrative against probably Benjamin Netanyahu, which is currently happening. Or probably the sting operations or ground coverages that the media done. A lot of media, people go ahead and cover Taliban in Afghanistan, of the activities of Taliban, or let's say the ground coverage which is done by BBC in India after the Gujarat riots. All of those also come as targeting. But understand why does that become very important? Because why foreign military or let's say political leaders have been targeted historically. Can note on 2 folds of classification. That number one, as long as internal disturbance continues to exist, on the idea of state social contract that continues to exist between the government and the people, the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens. So, in cases of per se, in cases of let's say the 9/11, probably US has to go and locate where probably Osama bin Laden is. Probably US has to target a lot of Pakistani media outlets, or let's say Pakistani military leaders who are probably hiding Osama bin Laden, or probably Osama bin Laden as a military leader has to be assassinated. All of those things eventually scaffold, because that multiplies the impact of the harms that never exist on our side of the world but exclusively exist on their side of the world, because Osama bin Laden probably never gets located, he is never dead in the first place. But more importantly, understand on the idea of external disturbance then. There are probably disturbances happening in some country like India and USA or let's say Norway do not care about it. Understand that, let's say Norway journalist questioning Modi about the press conference and all of those things, why does he not do press conferences? Understand on that idea what happens basically. Norway has 3 big investment banks which currently have a lot of investment in, let's say, in startups. If, let's say, the trade policy of June 2026 does not get updated, or probably international journalism probably does not cover that, Norway never has the clarity if the state is in welfare. Probably not. Australia never has the clarity if the tariff policy is in welfare of Australia. As long as that continues to exist, probably Norway's investment banks will never be at a good, will never be at a good assurance. It becomes a responsibility of the state, but more importantly, it also becomes a responsibility of state media outlets to go ahead and cover these targetings. Let's say target Modi to some extent, or let's say on the idea of media narrative target Modi, so that at least at some point in time, you probably have to go ahead and target the idea that, okay, this tariff policy is good or bad, I need an assessment for it first hand on the primary level. But secondly, more importantly, understand, it is harder to prevent disturbance of foreign markets. Why? Because as established by Naman himself, to the larger extent, these markets are extremely diluted right now due to globalization. Due to the saturation that continues to exist, it is extremely difficult in order for you to be in USA and probably determine how your money is doing in India. For those reasons, this intervention becomes extremely important, and this intervention also becomes extremely political, because this creates a kind of geopolitical tilting that is required for you to probably have the welfare of the state. This is where you can go ahead and understand smart geopolitical play which is required in cases of external disturbance. If we can go ahead and classify the kind of intervention or the kind of situations where this kind of targeting is required on the idea of external disturbance and internal disturbance, we take this debate on 3 levels. Number one, on the idea of deterrence. The moment you probably do any kind of, selective part of the head, you selectively just go and cut the head of the snake. What happens? Snake dies. But this is an incomplete metaphor. The snake dies without risking the million worms who are probably fighting for it. On that idea, millions of citizens and military lives are saved because they probably never go to the battlefront and never probably go ahead and fight on these things, or probably the war never escalates. But number two, the harms of the conflict never trickle down to the people, and this is more important. The moment probably the Iranian leader dies, they probably don't have anyone to go and look up to or probably conduct themselves in the war in itself. Yes, Piyush.
Principle of democracy gets violated when you try to go ahead and protect your own sovereignty in a motherfucking foreign country. So.
Yeah, Taliban has no democracy. Even if US goes and intervenes in Taliban, or selectively targets, selectively targets the leader of Taliban, probably that does not violate the principle of democracy. But even in that case, I will clarify you. On, let's say, US intervening in Venezuela, yes, that's selective targeting. But does it make targeting an illegitimate tool just because USA intervened in Venezuela? Probably, let's say, USA has intervened previously. UK has intervened to kill Mussolini at some point in time. Probably Hitler has died previously. All of those things have happened. Does it make targeting an illegitimate tool because of one instance if they can go ahead and cherry pick one example? But secondly, and more importantly, understand on the idea of accountability. We think that the decision to participate in the conflict is never unanimously decided within the consensus of the people who are already participating in it. So the assassination of someone like Mussolini actually works in the larger benefit of the people at the end of the day. What happens is basically people probably never want to participate in the war. They want peace. The people who are dictating these policies are probably people in administration, are people who probably are currently military leaders who have no primary channel to talk to the people who probably also participate in the war. This is where the accountability factor becomes important, because the people who have the accountability probably should. Now, thirdly, which is going to be expanded by Alitiya later, the idea of prevention of escalation and prevention of broader wars is something which is very important. And for all those three reasons on the idea of deterrence and accountability and prevention of escalation, we still take this way because we approve all of that benefits because the policies continue to exist on outside of the world, but we also prove to you why targeting is a legitimate tool.
Thank you for the fine speech. Calling upon the DPM on the stage.
ये पानी है? It's molecular. You can lick it. Let's go take one. Morning class.
Hello everyone, Deputy Prime Minister here. Before I start forward, POIs of the Prime Minister Mark would refer to verbal POIs, would refer to but only after the 5-minute mark. We'll start with my first word. Opposition completely misses the binary in this particular debate simply because of the fact that they do not understand that what they are supposed to defend in this particular regard is to say that despite the fact that internal targeting exists, internal check balance mechanisms exist, internal democratic structures exist for your nation to be held accountable, for the political organizations to be held accountable, they think that a foreign nation needs to go ahead and actually target people, not the parties, and that is a legitimate way to go about with this entire structure on two fronts, that is political targeting and military targeting. In their own terms, United States of America thinks that the people of Venezuela are incapable of deciding what the Venezuelan nation requires, the sort of government that the Venezuelan nation wants to. United States of America thinks that putting their military on the Venezuelan soil is going to be an act of sovereignty for their own fucking selves, and that in itself displays the sort of tilted power dynamics that exist and that gets exploited on the geopolitical inferences that it has. The capacity and audacity for the leader of opposition to come up on this stage and then ask the question that we will illegitimate and cherry-picking and uncharitable claims that we have in terms of the ideas and examples, while all they would talk about was Taliban, who apparently do not have any sort of, let us say, proper representation. For your conceptual understanding, Afghanistan is considered a nation and now currently has representation in multiple different national sovereign councils, etc. to begin with in the first place. In this particular regard then, the capacity for you to raise the question of whether ISIS and other such sleeper cell organizations that necessarily go ahead and quote-unquote threaten the democracy of your powerful politically charged nations like the United States of America is extremely flawed, simply because you created them in the first place to utilize them against other nations to begin with. Osama bin Laden would not exist if it was not for your intervention. That never should have happened in the first place to begin with, because that is away from your own motherfucking soil and has nothing to do with you. But that is the only exclusionary factor that you take into consideration. It makes this debate all the more worse, because you talk about legitimacy and then defend the idea of a binary that is United States versus Venezuela, where a special military operation to literally pick up like a basket of fruits the prime minister of a nation and take them away to your own nation is somehow a democratic procedure. Which fucking constitution has written that, and which constitution maker has allowed that sort of liberty is what I want to ask, because this is not a stupid question. This is a question of what necessarily democratic structures can allow and the degree of liberty that democratic structures can provide to you at any your own points in time. With that being said, let us start forward with the positive constructors that we have on our side of the paradigm. Someone gives you a clearly established case on two fronts. That is what they have to defend, not one, two fronts. The capacity for political narratives to be utilized and misrepresented, and the capacity for military interventions to be utilized in the name of targeting and calling them special military operations. They do bullshit to explain to you why military targetings are actually valid and a fair way to go ahead and put forth democratic standards. What they were supposed to prove to you is what is the intrinsic need of a foreign nation to do this on another nation's soil. They have not fulfilled that dynamic yet. Their duty needs to go ahead and do that framing before they even try to expand on that case. POI fast.
First principles tell why your counterfactual will be effective, considering all of that are present in the status quo as well.
Sure.
Simple response to that, we have not even started with principles, because that is when you get buried in this debate. And secondly, the entire idea of a counterfactual already takes up from the precedence and premise of the status quo, because we are not telling you that there is a problem in this world. We are telling the world was fine to begin with, but you decided that you have the superior moral authority and political high ground to intervene in another country. So our burden is not to say our counterfactual gets created, it fucking already exists, but cannot operate because of the moral high ground that you represent and defend in this particular debate. That is the reason why it is stable. But I still fucking charitable and explain to you why that is valuable and valid to begin with. Number gives you two layers of counterfactual analysis, one on military policies that allow us to go ahead and make sure that these particular human rights watches and other such third-party organizations that are keeping a watch in terms of, let us say, different structures that are utilized and implemented to make sure that such interventions do not lead to severe loss of lives are actually prioritized and taken into consideration. But also, it gives us the sort of political impunity required for us to not allow explicit targeting to be a democratic procedure at any or all points in time. The counterfactual from our side has three clear impacts. Number one, we actually preserve the entire idea of how a democracy should function. This debate is about statecraft. We tell you about state machinery, and a state machinery needs some sort of immunity with decision-making regards, simply because of the fact that high-ranking officials do take decisions that necessarily go ahead and affect the civilians on a day-to-day life. And that in itself means that this particular political immunity is necessary for you to go ahead and say that a foreign nation can basically extradite this information and then conveniently release it like Russia did in Crimea war is not something that is anything except for, let us say, an intervention and a pissing shit on the entire idea of what democracy is about, simply because you disregarded a country's own decision to make a sovereign choice and stand by it. That in itself is the uncharitability of your entire premise in this particular regard. But then again, what Naman also does is explains to you two different analyses on the what regret metric looks like. The falsification or defamation that the political targeting does is almost always, or at a significant number of times, not established on factual accuracy, but also established on the sort of, let us say, flaming propaganda that you can utilize to destabilize a problem or destabilize a particular government or escalate situations of civilian structures. Why do you think that is inherently problematic? Three reasons why. Number one, the capacity for that to actually create a harm is not on a high-ranking politician, but if you as a foreign nation do not go ahead and target BJP as a government and target Narendra Modi, you are likely going to go ahead and create more destabilization or stronger narratives, but at the same time, the trickle-down impact is not on a high-ranking politician. The trade-off that you make in this debate is to say that loss of one life or the loss of the dignity of one person is not important, but the actual trade-off that you are making is that is going to harm the teeming millions of the nation who get affected at the destabilization of a particular government. And for you to say that destabilization and lawlessness is something that gets primarily better and is something that's a viable alternative to having state structures internalized mechanism is a fucking disregard to every citizen that exists in that entire nation, because you decided with a moral superiority that this particular nation's citizens do not know how to vote, do not know how to make sure accountability exists. Protests and all other sorts of mechanisms do exist on either sides of the debate. You are the one disregarding the same and actually obliterating the state mechanisms to begin with. But on a clearer note than in this particular regard, the capacity for us to get a tangible benefit is many times higher than whatever they have, simply because their binary is flawed and illegitimate structure from their side cannot go ahead and within a disproportionate power dynamic create tangible revolution that necessarily goes ahead and creates long-term betterment. For our side, we utilize democratic structures to make sure that we are engaging with the growth that a democratic structure is able to offer to the people with that purpose.
For the speech, calling upon the dealer on the stage. Here.
Before I start, my order to everyone.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Hi, Alitiya, pronounced she and her, going DLO, on voice after 5:30 only by a raised hands. Don't verbalize, don't matter. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The burden on government is simple: to go ahead and give you counterfactual to prove why the harms that they're pushing on us never exist in that paradigm at all points in time. So insofar as I go ahead and prove to you that shows counterfactual, which is like only happening if there is no intervention that ever takes place in history ever, is like unlikely to exist. I think we take simply based on the fact that they don't fulfill their burden. At all points in time, understand the need for you to have vested interest, or the fact that you want to protect yourself and protect your own, but the kind of incentive that you have to go ahead and increase your power, go to other people, trying to go ahead and ensure that you have expansion at all points in time, your country is looked at as good at your point in time, is something that has happened from age immemorial. I am unable to understand why this principle or this active incentive is something that goes away from every legal effort. This looks like Genghis Khan still fucking going and expanding every single place, and this also looks like pagan people still trying to protect their territory. I'm unable to understand why you won't try to protect yourself at all points in time, why you won't try to go and ensure other people don't become a threat to you. I'm unable to understand where exactly this intervention never happens in history. But also understand secondarily, I think if the counterfactual is still talking about why exactly embargoes are something that occurs, or why exactly peace talks is something that occurs, I think that is the go ahead and hate Modi. I think this is significantly better for you. I think at all points in time, the kind of economic benefits that is then accrued for India is also fucking better. This looks like USA is still able to go ahead and have FDIs, have the investment in the fucking Indian economy at all points in time. Insofar as this kind of global perception is something that matters to you, and it does, because this gives you legitimacy for your own fucking country, but also ensures that your economy is something that remains stable as well. This looks like other countries needing to view later, needing to view as legitimate at all points in time. You want to protect yourself from market instability. You want to protect yourself from not having political leverage as like a country or like as a leader in the first place. The kind of shift that you have regarding how exactly perception works is that the way that you perceive a leader or whatever the leader does has an effect on the way that things work for the country itself. This looks like Trump going ahead and yes, speaking of the Venezuelan president, but also facing backlash for it. This only happens on our paradigm. This check and balance mechanism only happens on our paradigm because there is media narratives, because there is media perception of Trump doing an illegitimate and immoral thing. I am unable to understand how this call-out is then efficiently safeguarded on this side of the world ever. At all points in time then, we think you're able to principally protect your own choice better, principally go ahead and call out people, wherein Venezuelan citizens can go ahead and spam Twitter, wherever in Venezuelan, like the governments themselves are able to go ahead and call Trump out at all points in time. But understand the way that power works, understand the way that stability works. Stability is not essentially safeguarded to you, it only works if you have fucking leverage. This only happens if you have some amount of political gravitas which is granted to you because you're doing the right things. Which means if Trump is able to go ahead and prove why Venezuela being so fucking unstable, like going ahead and flushing out refugees into Colombia, into Ecuador, ensuring that their security is falling, going ahead and ensuring that the Colombian economy is falling because it cannot deal with this influx of refugees is a good enough reason to intervene, is also a form of legitimacy that is required. Without justification, you cannot be a fucking dictator either way. On our paradigm, the whole world is able to call out Trump if he does that.
On your best case, certain countries don't have the same ability to go ahead and target as US. They cannot have the same level of legitimacy as US targeting another country.
Great, exactly. Because unequal leverage exists, then I am unable to understand how you are able to protect yourself if you have no narrative basis to go up against these big guns. US can go ahead and launch actual military operations, which is not just to the leaders of these nations. They can go ahead and want to raise a fucking country to the ground. How do you go ahead and protect yourself against that if your reputation is the kind you are neither which ways? And all points in time then, because you're able to call out Trump and say why he's better, he does not go ahead and decimate and like make the strip of Gaza a proud land at all points in time. But also understand secondarily, why is the principle of life better protected on our side of the world at all points in time? The kind of issues that happens with these leaders, the kind of fuckery that this leader does is something that is called out at all points in time, and this is good because that means the citizens don't have to suffer for it. When an immigrant from India goes to like USA, the best that they're told is you're stealing my job and not that Modi made my life hell. I think at all points in time, this is what is better better in general. But also let's talk about efficiency, let's talk about utility. What utility do they offer to you regarding how exactly this protection mechanism works? Because I still don't know how their counterfactual is likely to exist. If they don't go ahead and prove the likelihood of the counterfactual, they fall on burden. But also secondarily, I think there is more escalation that happens of conflicts itself, because now you can no longer target individuals, you need to target armies, countries, absolute media armada. At all points in time, the kind of collateral harm you have from that is so much more on their side of the world. But also secondarily, I think it is way more utility specific. I think it is way easier for you to go ahead and
calling upon the government with
Hi, clearly audible? Right. Mundhra, with no preferred POI pronouns, POI, raise hands, I take. Please don't distract me because I know you will.
We love you, we won't do it.
Right. With that, starting my right. Starting my speech then in 3, 2, 1. If at the best case they want to claim a technicality that we have to still prove the likelihood of a counterfactual, I think UN going ahead and then proving documentations as to why China is committing genocide and concentration camps on Rohingya Muslims is also particularly something that China does not agree to, but all Muslim countries have cut down ties or have recent ties particularly with China, China on political measures and on those grounds. That is our counterfactual that exists in the status quo. On our side of the counterfactual, you go ahead and focus on these things more rather than this particular targeting. But if they want to go ahead and question the legitimacy of targeting, I think they're way off in this debate because we are at all points of time logically prior. Why are we logically prior then in this debate? They want to talk about legitimacy, that how you will never find Osama bin Laden. No, you will never create Osama bin Laden on our sides of the world, because understand, when ISIS goes ahead and becomes the problem of the world, before that they were affiliated to Al-Qaeda, before that they were still the creation of US. It has been a particular habit of these particular Western countries that they want to go ahead and debate, that they go ahead and prop up these political and military targeting via other third-party structures, and then they leave it at B, and then that goes ahead and then creates problems for the world in terms of humanitarian crisis and etc. Right? But even if they want to go ahead and in their yellow speech say that investment banks need more assurance in Norway and Australia, I think that is exactly where my POI comes into play, when we tell you that you don't have symmetric capacity to go ahead and target at all points of time, which makes it principally illegitimate on their side to go ahead and prove that there is a legitimacy of target. I don't understand how they do it. If they want to go ahead and claim that US doing it and Russia doing it is legitimate, sure. But then the only response I have from Alitiya on this is that you will have backlash on Trump. Venezuela president got picked up. What the fuck will I do with the backlash? Their people are struggling, their oil prices have fallen, their import and export has fucking crashed down. What about it? But even if you want to go ahead and claim that Venezuela president was pulled up because they were not following democratic processes, you don't know shit about how much crude oil is present in Venezuela and what the US incentive is to go ahead and then capture and stop that Venezuelan crude oil market, to go ahead and forward that the Alaskan oil should go ahead later. The Alaskan oil should go ahead and then prop up in the market more so that they can go ahead and then control these oil rates. Understand that whenever you go ahead and politically and militarily target as a first world country, you at all points of time have a perverse political incentive, and that has been proven. It's simple. When the Ukraine coup happened in 2013, Russia released Secretary of State conversations choosing apparently the Ukrainian president. This is how targeting looks like. But then understand, on our side of the world, you don't go ahead and then call out probably Victoria Nuland. You call out the entire US state party of Democrats, and that was at that point of time. Because then it's a democratic policy which is problematic, not Victoria Nuland getting on a call which is problematic. And I think that is better dealt on our side. Why is that so? Because number one, if you go ahead and then call out policies, number one, your call out becomes more legitimate, because you can go ahead and then not taking singular actions of individuals on our side of the world into consideration as to why these things need to be gone ahead and then justified. You take up whole policies which go ahead and then affect millions of people, but also affect the political functioning of the party as well within these countries, which goes ahead and then creates more accountability. Yes, please.
Yeah, so Trump is still a dick on your side of the world. What happens if the president does not get picked up? He probably gets militarily annexed the entire country.
The Republicans get called out instead of Trump. The Trump is not the only problem in this regard. And I'll tell you why is that better of why Republicans get called out. Because Republicans as a party have been supporting Trump's irrational policy. Instead of calling out Trump, you call out particular Republicans on our side of the world, which is more proximate. There you go ahead and then justify to the larger populace of US or outside the country as to why this particular targeting happens in the best case scenario on your side of the world. But understand then as to what are the weighing metrics of this debate particularly. I want to talk about firstly in terms of where civilians are less vulnerable. On their side of the world, individual targeting is harmful. Why? Two reasons for that. Number one, political leaders, high-ranking political and military leaders are often seen as enigmatic leaders, which simply means that if you go ahead and target the entire regime of Iran, you still are targeting the ideology of Iran. But if you go ahead and then target Khomeini, you will never get the support of people of Iran, because Khomeini seems like a god to Iranian people in that scenario, because they have gone ahead and then taken, like, presented the life of Iranian Shias particularly that Khomeini has given them and bestowed upon them. In those kind of scenarios, I think civil unrest becomes a larger liability in these particular scenarios when you go ahead and do these people, which is simply as US killing the IRGC military head in Iraq when they were traveling, and that has created a lot of unrest not only Iran but also Iraq, when particularly US military bases have propped up more and they have started more droning exercises and military exercises in the Middle East particularly. In these scenarios, they cannot prove to me that civilians are better off at any point of time. Second, in terms of principles of democratic accountability, democracy falls on their side of the world. Why is that simply true? Democratic policies and the entire concept of democracy comes in the fact that people elect a set of people who run a set of institutions particularly. If you go ahead and then pinpoint the fault of these people on a single person rather than the entire set of people who is going ahead and running the business, because one person cannot go ahead and then run the entire democratic process of a country, you are creating a lot of problems. But in the best case scenario, if they want to go ahead and claim that, oh, dictatorship still exists, like let's say Iran again, or let's say North Korea for that matter, you still go ahead and then are able to target these countries, because these countries work on a single party formation, things like that. So you're still able to call out symmetrically better, and you still able to call out better on our side in terms of policy, but you're able to hold more people accountable who are also supportive of these extreme radicalisms, right? Because understand, ideology works in a particular way. If you tomorrow go ahead and then remove Trump, sure, maybe as much irrational actions won't happen, but you do not remove the Trump supporters on your side of the world. The people within the right-wing party in the US particularly go ahead and exist, and even if they don't fulfill Trump's point to the 100%, they can still do it to the 80%, and they can still go ahead and then create this less democratic accountability on their side. Nine? Cool. Last thing. Likelihood of civil I talk about likelihood of civil unrest being caused particularly. Right. I talk about civilian vulnerability happening. Understand, civilian unrest is caused when you go ahead and have economical problems in terms of daily day-to-day livelihood. On their side of the world, when you go ahead and see that is a legitimate tool to go ahead and call out singular leaders, you inherently go ahead and create a problem that creates a factionism within these countries, which simply looks like some people are in support of the call out, some people are not in support of the call out. The problem is that the civil unrest becomes particularly worse because you are facing two opposition factions in the name of one person rather than political ideologies and parties of what the democracy inherently should be about. Why do we then bring on delta clarification? The entire point is that, oh, we need to prove legitimate, this is something that is legitimate. For them to go ahead and then prove legitimacy within this debate, they still need to prove that there have been, like, say, some sort of betterments of these political and military targeting. In their best case, political targeting has become a joke where INC posts like Modi and Adani like fingering each other and stuff. But in the best case, in the military actions go ahead and then create more unstable situations, because you go ahead and try to take down these enigmatic figures who apparently have rescued the country and given them the entire concept of democracy with that movement. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech, calling upon the orgs there.
Rajat, you are doing this opposition whip. If I pronounce your name, POIs, just raise your hands, please. I'll just see what you are. Yeah. Starting my speech in the reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1. Gov had the fiat to assume that they can probably go for and implement a counterfactual, but they ended up making a counterfactual, which is basically subtraction of one particular action from the status quo. Panel, there are two major traits which are still intact in this side of the paradigm, is that leaders are still weak in this side of the paradigm. USA still wants power, Trump is still a madman at this side of the paradigm. The problem is, at the point in time when incentive structure is something which is never met, they are likely to take harsher steps which is never engaged by the side of the paradigm. The issue is that when they probably don't talk about how if you are not targeting the leaders, but still that hatred is there. How it's gonna be probably going forward and channel that is very simple. You go forward and kill, actually like you probably go forward and kill hatred for the whole state of Iran or the whole state of Venezuela, because normal people won't know what the particular party who is existing in a particular state, where they are more likely or it's more proximate for them to go forward and hate the whole system at every point in time. But then let's understand why the counterfactual in itself is extremely flawed. The issue is, since the counterfactual is something which is subtractive, which basically means these structures or embargo is something which is still the first step which is taken in the counter of status quo. Which means, because why the leaders in general always want some amount of legitimacy in every action they probably go forward and take. Which basically means if they go forward and take an extreme action without even an actual justification, the amount of hatred, the amount of backlash they are likely to probably go forward and approve is way higher. Which basically means the whole counterfactual in itself is extremely likely to probably go forward and fall, because there are examples in the status quo itself because people, the countries don't care. Panel, when you note about the countries that are probably going forward and talking about whose leaders are probably going forward and taken out, these countries are not extremely noble at the very first place. These countries have done violations which are something in itself has been internationally wrong. There has not been just one single actor who is negatively affected. There are multiple different actors who are being negatively affected. If it's about Iran, if it's about Venezuela, it's not just Trump and Trump's ego, it's also about multiple different countries who are probably affected by a particular action, which basically means that the amount of justification that is required is higher, which basically means coming on to the amount of the level of hate that you probably go forward and do is basically means that the amount of solvency that the side opposition is going forward and get is something that they could never get, because they have never gone forward and proved to me why this particular embargo would probably go forward and be like extremely high, would be working in the very first place. I mean, on to civilians' life. I mean, at the point in time, I guess they didn't give me an example where civilians' life in general is probably better even in their side of the paradigm in the particular country, because all these leaders in general are extremely cult in the very first place because they are extremely selfish. Even if I keep that aside, what is the consequence at the point where the other leaders are already a dick, but still the working of embargo is simply not happening? There are two major mechanisms. First mechanism in terms of the external hit that they would probably go forward and get. At the point in time, the channelizing of this particular accountability is gone forward to the entire country. I guess I am way more likely to probably hate the entire Iranians instead of Khomeini, because that's more proximate for me to probably go forward and understand. Which basically means the civilians' life is something which is way worse in their side of the paradigm, because they are more likely that USA would probably go forward and invade the entire Iran in their side of the paradigm. All those amount of attacks would probably happen in normal civilians' life. Even if I keep that aside, their principles are simply which won't stand. There are three principles, right? Principles of privacy, principles of democracy, principles of state welfare. I would be weighing on these principles, but I would be also establishing one more principle to weigh off their own case. First, the principle of privacy. I don't think so the people in this country in general have that amount of privacy to probably go for and approve. Why probably the new different government who would probably be set apart way more likely to probably go for and consent to this? Very simple. Because they are more accountable, at the point they are more limelighted, they are way likely to probably go forward and take care of the privacy. The thing is, even in the best case where they probably go forward and establish some sort of privacy, at least we are probably going forward and proving why the new government is way likely to be better, because this establishment is something in terms of global media or global eyes, which basically means they have way more incentive structures of this new government to probably go forward and take care of the new people, instead of the already existing fucking government who don't have any incentive structure. It has already been like gone outside either which way. Coming to principle of democracy. I don't think so it's extremely important when you talk about principle of choice and democracy. If I establish the principle of life in this particular place, principle of life in terms of I have already established in terms of privacy, because the lives in general are extremely protected in our side of the paradigm because they are more accountability structure exists. They are more likely because of the whole world knows what is happening in Iraq. If there is a dummy government which is set there, the lives in general are safe because at any point in time, if USA tries to be extremely humanitarian, they are very likely to be called out, which basically the lives are better. The lives are better in other countries because these countries which are already unstable are way less likely to probably go for an attack other countries because the leader is taken up for attack at every point in time. At the point in time, they don't prove to me why they in this side of the country this political leader would probably not do attacks anymore because Iran was embargoed for a very long time. These all countries had all these sanctions and for the very long time. This didn't stop them to probably go for and harm in different countries. They don't have any solvency in place under the paradigm. So I'll ask you, okay, for PI.
You just assaulted US wave that countries will take hostile actions and wage wars would never prove why that's likely. When US killed Cabinet, escalated into a war in your world and killed thousands of people. Defend that Fatima.
USA, Trump would still be kind. I don't think so. A normal embargo would probably go forward and satisfy his kindness at every point in time, which means he would derive some sort of satisfaction by taking some action. The action in general would be hatred towards the entire political party or would be hatred towards the entire political state at every point in time. They can't probably go forward and say that. Coming on to the democracy and the likelihood of choice, I guess the democracy is very likely to be established post this particular leader going on because this leader in general has no incentive to probably go forward and take care of the Democratic Party. Give me one example where this country had proper democracy working, where the leaders were probably changing after every 5 years because their leaders in general are extremely powerful, that they are probably extremely selfish. They don't care about what is probably the democratic figures. They would probably don't care. At the point in time, this establishment of new government happens. I guess the likelihood of this democracy being established is way higher. Because even in the worst case, there is probably the mechanism that still exists is the mechanism of accountability in terms of the limelight that exists, which basically means the democracy will still be better than what was there right time. I don't think so. The principle of choice was still there in this side of the paradigm because they never proved to me why these political leaders or these guys were extremely good in the very first place, that they are probably care about the choice of the people at every point in time. Lastly, why do we win this debate? We win this debate on two major facts. We win this debate where we prove why the principle of life is something which is protected at every point in time. We prove why the people in general in that particular country and the external countries are probably protected at every point in time. We prove to you why this accountability structure is something which is still top down, which basically means if one particular action is done by a particular leader, he is accountable. Not other actors who are not even included in the particular action is accountable. Which means at every point in time, this basically means if someone does wrong, they will be accountable at every point in time.
Thank you all for the final speech. For your want to reply, and we are ready.
Hi, I'm just going to take 30 seconds before I start. This is my 10th break. Nama taught me a lot. I'm grateful that I did. Rajat is my constant break. Cool. Starting reply in 3, 2, 1. Mundhra might come and tell you a counterfactual call out is probably the most we did, but that is still enough to win this debate because that is what the manual fucking says. Understand then, if I still go to t is equal to 0 and still look at the counterfactual, I'm unable to understand why that exists. The actual incentives were never cleared out for these people. I think this leader still wants power. This leader still wants influence. That is just how leaders work. If I have to understand differently, you should prove differently, which they did. At all points in time then, I cannot go to time is equal to 0 and still find a place where people are okay enough without deposing leaders. I think that's still happened. But also secondarily, the way that power works through leverage at all points in time means that you want to protect your interests because you have vested interest in the most amount of power that you want to go ahead and get at all points in time. Insofar as that is true, understand what happens on this side of the world. You probably go ahead and call out Republicans. You probably go ahead and not attack Trump. We still think the escalation is something that happens, which looks like one person does not get deposing on that side of the world. The personal choice of multiple Republicans being attacked. You see a Republican on the street in USA and you probably pelt stones at them because you go ahead and associate every bad thing Trump has done to things won't happen. I think any sort of embargo, any sort of democratic viewpoint or global policy that happens when internal failures fail. This looks like Indian governments going ahead and doing bad things, which is why you are sitting at a meeting and talking to the Indian Prime Minister. At all points in time, internally, there will be issues because there are different factions. If that one issue is going to be talking about why exactly internal failures, which is why you won't be a threat to other people, I think that's bullshit. This looks like North Korean generals still being looked at as like bad people, but still being looked at as threats to the South Korean military at all points in time. I think that to protect themselves, the South Korean government should have every right to go ahead and kill off a North Korean general. This is what we're talking about. We think protection is better. We think life is better protected at all points in time. The way that you respond and your channel to it is more legitimate either which way. Why is this true? If Trump goes ahead and calls every single person in the world a dumb fucker, I think Trump will face backlash on our side of the world. Either which way, this backlash only happens because leaders are allowed to be called out on our side of the world. The whole Republican Party simply cannot be called out. That is fucking inefficient. I don't know what sort of democracy they're trying to run. But also understand thirdly, at all points in time, because you don't abjectly hate people, I think there is more utility at all points in time. This looks like you're still having foreign direct investment in India, even though Trump probably hates India at any point in time. This looks like you're still having some sort of money flowing in the economy. This looks like having global power, global stability, and things like that. The reason why these people with higher leverage on our side of the world still don't go ahead and do bad things is because they need the good media image, they need the good media justification to go ahead and pick up a president like a bunch of fruits. At all points in time, then this is important for you to go ahead and do. I think because you want this positive perception, you are unlikely to go ahead and do extremely bad things on the side of the world. On this side of the world, there is no protection mechanism against this. This looks like you're needing military annexations because you still want oil in Venezuela as Trump for all those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you on the flag. I'm calling to order the flag on the stage. Here, going as the prompt reply, we'll start with my first one. If Trump is country, blame the people of USA, do not go ahead and invade other nations. That is not how democratic structures work. This is the entire bloody point of this particular debate. You replacing the capacity for authorities is actually going to just further perpetuate the amount of war that can happen. The same thing happened with Khamenei as well. You just replaced one authoritative regime with another, and the war just keeps on escalating and going to worse situations. That is where the entire only exclusive tangible positive data that you have or principle of life is actually worse on your side, because you probably do not have the capacity to actually de-escalate situations because of the moral high ground and the exploitative nature of this particular democracy that are targeting other democracies is in this particular regard. Democratic principle assumes, quote unquote, one very important thing: people are responsible to elect a particular government and are responsible enough to allow for governmental structures and overthrows. It does not matter if it does not fit our own definitions of what a democracy should look like. It does not matter if our own democracy definitions of what necessarily particular social structures and social narratives should look like. People in different regions which have coalesced together under a similar identity have the absolute authority to choose what sort of democratic structures they want, have democratic structures that allow them to go ahead and revolt against these regimes, and also have different formulations and mechanisms that actually allow them to change these regimes to begin with in the first place. The reason why these regime changes are less likely to happen on your side is because everybody is now going to assume that there is going to be some sort of an exploitative, let us say, military intervention or some sort of, let us say, cherry picking of these particular leaders. You think that taking away the crux of, let's say, somebody who is the decision maker is just going to stop the entire process. The reason why this violates democratic principles is because LO just talks about the legitimacy of such decisions on a military scale, but DLO just defends the entire idea of why USA is the justifiable enforcer of democracy. Think about this. USA cannot go ahead and wage a multi-front war. That is the simple reason why there is no escalation on our side of the paradigm, because USA will think 5 times about daring to do the same fucking thing in Venezuela, Iran, Iraq and maybe 2 other nations that USA probably politically thinks is not fair in terms of what democratic structures look like. That is the simple explanation on why deterrence does exist on our side, and no madman actually goes ahead and tangibly becomes, let us say, a ruler of this particular kingdoms or nations simply because democratic structures are more relied upon. You cannot just go ahead and just nullify the entire discussion by whining about our counterfactual in the whip speech and saying that, oh, the counterfactual is just you minusing the entire thing that we regret and then going ahead and saying that the rest of the world is the way that it is. I'll quote the manual. In THRX debates, all teams debate with the benefit of hindsight. That does not mean that I have to defend said hindsight. The teams must describe how an alternative world looks like in a world without X, which automatically gives 2 layers of feedback, fear and analysis in terms of what the world should look like. And I am actually supposed to explain the world without, which is what we have done in our counterfactual. So the benefits on our counterfactual is not just to go ahead and say, oh, it is status quo removing these sort of interventions. No, we are talking about the entire idea of why targeting inherently not existing makes status quo more stable. That is what Naman's speech was all about, if you would have actually cared to listen to it in the first place. Our burden was to explain why targeting on 2 fronts are problematic and what the viable counterfactual looks like. The principles that we use to create a check mechanism on this is the principle of privacy of some individuals getting violated unnecessarily for, let us say, state purposes, the principle of sovereignty of a nation being totally obliterated, and the entire construct of how principle of democracy works. The international geopolitics needs a trust mechanism and coordination framework without which international relations and geopolitics cannot exist on your side. Every time that somebody thinks they are morally superior, or had to prove the likelihood of war escalation, or had to prove why preventing escalation actually happens on their side, or also had to prove why soft political targeting is justifiably fair, which you never really even talk about because we're too busy talking about Trump. Why is military intervention or targeting the only way for accountability is also not something you have proven, because we tell you that there are other mechanisms for accountability that exist not only on our side but also on your side as well to begin with in the first place. We actually debate and actually prove the 2-pronged burdens that this motion puts, and you never even talk about one of the burdens of this motion in the entirety of the 4 bad speeches that I have had to hear for the last 1 hour.
Thank you so much. Live हुआ है ना?
Guys, everyone was not a match outside.
Yep.
Just